Crystal chandeliers in the private banquet hall refracted dazzling halos of light, and the air was thick with the mingled scents of expensive champagne and cigars. Amid the rustle of fine clothes and fragrant hair, I was dressed in a sharply tailored couture gown. Effortlessly exchanging pleasantries with several key business partners and handling the multinational acquisition our family conglomerate had just finalized. Tonight was the anniversary celebration of the family enterprise. And as the nominal head, I had to ensure every detail was flawless. Yet my husband, Mark, who should have accompanied me as my guest, had not appeared. Worse, my closest friend Sarah was also absent from this highly publicized event. My phone suddenly vibrated against the noisy backdrop of the banquet. I lazily swiped the screen open and saw a brief message from Mark. "I eloped with your friend. I'm never coming back." Without the slightest hesitation or emotional twitch, I didn't even lift an eyelid. I opened the reply box and typed 3 words. "Good luck to you." Then completely screenshot and saved the message. To others. This might have been a betrayal capable of shattering someone, but in my cold business logic, the garbage had just cleared its own doorstep, which actually saved a lot of trouble. I turned and pushed through the crowd, heading straight to the private command center at the back of the hall. Opening the door, the private butler and the head of security immediately came forward. I ignored their pleasantries and slapped my phone down on the rosewood table, my tone cold and absolute. "Activate the highest level financial freeze immediately. Cancel all credit cards and supplementary cards under Mark's name that are guaranteed by me or the family trust. Within 1 minute, I want him unable to charge a penny anywhere on earth." The finance director's expression shifted slightly, and he sat at the computer, fingers flying over the keyboard. On the screen, several top-tier black cards changed to frozen within seconds. Watching the flashing red code, I continued issuing orders. Notify security to use all authorized measures at once. Replace the locks on the 3 seaside villas, the downtown penthouse, and the country estate registered to Mark and me with the highest grade dynamic code locks. Simultaneously cancel all of Mark's facial recognition and fingerprint access privileges. Pack his personal belongings and put them in storage. If he or anyone for Sarah dares come within half a step, call the police immediately. The private butler responded promptly, picked up the radio, and began relaying the commands in an orderly fashion. At 6 in the morning, just as the city was being roused by the first light, a rapid, violent pounding sounded at the heavy solid wood door of the top-floor apartment in the city center. The noise carried an imperious brusqueness, accompanied by dull thuds that echoed down the empty stairwell. I was sitting by the floor-to-ceiling window in the dim morning light, drinking black coffee, not even bothering to lift an eyelid. My private butler hurried over to the video intercom to check, then turned back with a slightly grave look on his face. "Sir, police officers from the local precinct are here, and a few people claiming to be locksmith technicians are with them. Let them in." I set down the bone china cup, my voice calm to the point of flatness. A few minutes later, 2 uniformed officers entered the living room, escorted by the butler. The lead officer scanned the luxurious interior, produced his badge, and spoke in a businesslike tone. "Are you the owner of this residence? We received a report that this legal dwelling has been illegally occupied. That access controls and the fingerprint lock have been maliciously tampered with, preventing the lawful occupant from returning home. The complainant also alleges that his personal property has been unlawfully detained and locked away." The complainant the officer mentioned was, of course, Mark, far away in another country and in a state of panic. I stood up deliberately, smoothed the silk robe I was wearing, my gaze devoid of any warmth. I showed no sign of agitation, and offered no unnecessary explanation. Instead, I signaled to the legal counsel behind me to hand over a file bag that had long been prepared. "Officer, please review these documents." I sat down on the sofa, my tone icy and clear. "First, this apartment and all properties under my name are my personal premarital assets, of which I hold absolute and sole ownership. Second, according to Article 12 of the prenuptial agreement we both signed and had notarized during the marriage, If either party commits malicious abandonment, betrays the family, or seriously damages the family's reputation, they unconditionally and automatically forfeit the right to use all shared and related residences. The lead officer took the thick stack of legal papers and examined the seals and signatures closely. As his eyes moved down the pages, his brow gradually relaxed and his expression shifted from purely procedural to one of appraisal toward the woman before him. "That's not all," I continued, not giving him much time to ponder, and presented more damaging evidence. Late last night, the complainant Mark, fully aware that he had not terminated his employment contract or his positions within the group, unilaterally transferred and embezzled several significant sums of the group's core funds through overseas accounts. This is the preliminary audit report and screenshots of the funds flow that the group's chief financial officer just sent. I pushed another tablet toward the officer. In other words, not only does he lack legal residence rights here, he is now suspected of serious occupational embezzlement and misappropriation of funds. The police should be seeking him, not entertaining his unreasonable complaint here. The two officers stared at the clear bank statements and financial seals on the tablet. Their faces changed instantly. They exchanged a look and immediately realized this was no simple civil property dispute but a thunderous internal reckoning within a wealthy family. The lead officer closed the file. His attitude shifted in an instant. In an official tone he said, "Since this is your personal property with absolute ownership, and the other party appears to be in breach and possibly involved in illegal activity, our response ends here. If the other party continues to harass you maliciously, you may apply to the court for a restraining order. Thank you." "Officer, see them out," I said coolly. The butler made a courteous gesture of this way and politely escorted the two officers and the locksmith company personnel out. The whole process took less than half an hour. No heated arguments, no melodramatic to-go war. Just absolute legal grounds and decisive, overwhelming force. Yet this was only the beginning. Almost as soon as the police left, my personal phone began vibrating like crazy. The screen flashed a string of unfamiliar encrypted overseas calls. No need to guess, it was Mark. Stranded in a foreign land and just taken a beating. I watched the number pulse on the screen, hit decline, and promptly blacklisted it. Right after that, an email from Mark's counsel popped into my inbox. It was full of threats, accusing me of maliciously freezing his assets and violating his personal freedom, demanding that I immediately restore all his credit cards within 2 hours and hand over the keys to all the villas, or they would enlist Sarah's family influence to launch a full-scale siege against my company in the capital markets. I snorted at the threat on the screen. Sarah's family were second-rate suppliers who depended on our group to survive. Talk of a capital market siege was laughable. I forwarded He emailed to the company's general counsel with a brief instruction. Add a civil suit against Mark immediately on grounds of intimidation, extortion, and commercial defamation. And meanwhile suspend performance of all outstanding contracts with Sarah's family enterprises and our group pending a full compliance audit. Having arranged all that, I picked up the now lukewarm black coffee and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. At 9:30 in the morning, the atmosphere in the boardroom on the top floor of the group headquarters was so oppressive that the air itself seemed to have congealed. Seated along both sides of the long ebony conference table were the group's core directors and senior executives. Everyone sat upright. Expressions varied, their gazes furtively drifting to the chair at the head of the table from time to time. A sense of impending storm hung in the air. Everyone knew that the scandal that had suddenly broken about Mark late last night and the asset freezing incident this morning had already triggered a seismic shock within the group's senior core circle. I pushed open the heavy double wooden doors and walked into the room in steady high heels. Without an unnecessary opening remark, I took the head seat, my sharp eyes sweeping the room and taking in the expressions on each director's face. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've convened this emergency board meeting for one agenda item only." My long fingers tapped the table lightly, producing a crisp, dull sound. In view of Mark's current serious breaches of executive conduct, alleged embezzlement of company funds, and malicious usurpation of corporate interests. I propose that we immediately remove Mark from all executive positions within the group and dismiss him from his board seat. No sooner had I finished than Director Zhang, seated third from the left, could no longer remain calm. As a longtime subordinate of Mark's late father, he had quietly shielded Mark on the board. He slammed his hand on the table and demanded, his tone rife with doubt and accusation, "Chairperson, although Mark's actions have been somewhat rash, this is after all his personal matter. And as executive vice president he has also rendered meritorious service to the group. Are you not being too hasty, too disrespectful to the company's elders, to propose removing his core positions based on a few screenshot fragments of unclear origin? Have you considered how much turmoil this will cause the group's stock price if this gets out?" As soon as Zhang finished speaking, several small and medium shareholders who usually sided with him chimed in, and a buzz of conversation rose in the room. I looked at Director Zhang's face written over with calculations of interest, and instead of getting angry, I sneered. I gave a look to the executive assistant behind me, and the large screen sprang to life, displaying a detailed audit report dozens of pages long stamped with the seal of one of the Big Four accounting firms. Director Zhang, it seems you still don't care enough about the company's financial condition. I stood, hands braced on the table, looking down at him. This isn't just Mark's private matter. The audit report clearly shows that over the past year, Mark exploited his position overseeing overseas expansion to funnel tens of millions of yuan of company funds to a design studio called Starlit Splendor by setting up shell companies and maliciously signing fake service contracts. And the actual controller of that studio is Sarah. The screen then flipped to more conclusive evidence. Records of massive fund transfers, receipts bearing Sarah's handwritten signature, and even an authorization for asset transfers signed by Mark while on vacation overseas. Each piece of evidence was ironclad, admitting no excuse. The murmur in the boardroom ceased abruptly. Director Zhang's face went deathly pale. He opened his mouth but could not utter a word. He had never expected that I would move so quickly and be able to dig up such deep, fatal dirt. Moreover, I withdrew my gaze and sat back down, my tone returning to calm but carrying an irresistible weight, pursuant to the company charter and the anti-commercial bribery law. The group has the right to pursue all legal remedies against any executive who seriously damages the group's interests or is suspected of occupational embezzlement. Therefore, I hereby announce 3 decisions. First, immediately remove Mark from all positions. Second, immediately revoke all of Mark's unvested equity options and dividends. Third, formally file a lawsuit with the court and seize all of Mark's personal assets to fill the huge financial hole he caused the company. All those in favor? Opposed? A cold gaze swept over everyone present. Director Zhang wiped the cold sweat on his brow and did not dare utter a single word of objection. He raised his hand tremblingly, his voice dry. I approve the chairman's decision, with Director Zhang's concession. The other wavering directors also raised their hands one after another to approve. The unanimous approval was not surprising. After the meeting, I stayed alone in the empty conference room. The special assistant hurried in and whispered a fresh update. Chairman, Mark and Sarah, who are far abroad, have just learned of the group's dismissal and asset seizure and have completely collapsed emotionally. Mark's phone has been blown up by dozens of debt collectors. And Sarah, because her studio's funding has completely collapsed, is currently having a fierce argument with Mark locally. Let them argue. I lifted the hot tea the secretary had just brewed and took a small sip. This is only the beginning. Send out my order. Package all the materials we've gathered about Sarah plagiarizing industry core secrets and engaging in industrial espionage, and immediately send them to the major fashion associations and leading enterprises back home. I want her to have absolutely nowhere to stand in the entire industry. The special assistant left to carry out the order, and the top floor offices fell quiet again. In the VIP reception room of a top law firm, the air was filled with the scent of premium bitter orange leaf incense. Yet it could not dispel the gloom on the faces of the people across from me. Beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows lay the city's busiest financial street, teeming with traffic. Sitting before me was Attorney Lin, a multinational divorce litigation and asset liquidation expert whom Mark had specially hired at a high salary. Along with several exhausted-looking assistants, Attorney Lin pushed up the gold-rimmed glasses on his nose and, trying to break the silence with a businesslike, imposing tone, said, "Ms. Gu, my client Mr. Mark has fully authorized me to handle this divorce and division of assets. We believe your prior unilateral freezing of assets, removal from positions, and application to the court for seizures have seriously infringed upon Mr. Mark's legal rights. Hereby, I formally demand that you unconditionally lift the freeze on certain accounts under Mr. Mark's name by 3 p.m. today and transfer 300 million yuan in cash to the designated overseas account in accordance with the principle of dividing marital property accumulated during the marriage. Otherwise, we will represent Mr. Mark and Ms. Sarah to file multiple malicious suits against you in international courts, accusing you of economic persecution and abuse of power." Listening to Attorney Lin's impassioned threats, I did not even lift an eyelid. I gracefully raised the bone china cup before me, took a light sip of warm lemon water, and put on an air of complete ease. Such blustered intimidation is nothing but a clown's impotent rage in the face of absolute evidence. Attorney Lin, it seems you didn't clean your client's underwear before taking this case, I said, setting down the cup. My gaze cut through them like a blade, my voice cold and piercing. Since you represent Mark, let's let the evidence speak. Please open the folder in front of you to page 3. Attorney Lin blinked in surprise and, with some suspicion, turned the page. When his eyes scanned the contents, his expression changed instantly. It was an authoritative investigative report issued by an international financial audit agency, clearly recording that, just 1 week before Mark sent that elopement message, he had, through extremely covert offshore financial maneuvers, secretly transferred a total of 150 million yuan in 3 transactions to a shell company registered in a Caribbean tax haven. And the ultimate beneficial owner of that shell company was none other than Sarah. This could be normal business investment allocation. Attorney Lin tried to defend himself, forcing calm, but a fine cold sweat had broken out on his forehead. Normal allocation, I scoffed. Cutting him off. Turn to page 5. These are the original vouchers and bank statements for multiple bogus overseas technology procurement contracts that Mark, abusing his position, maliciously colluded with Sarah to sign over the past 6 months. Each transaction constitutes serious embezzlement and misappropriation of funds under our criminal law and relevant international judicial assistance conventions. The amount involved is extraordinarily large, punishable by more than 10 years imprisonment, and all related funds and assets will be unconditionally subject to compulsory recovery and confiscation. I leaned forward slightly, my sharp gaze fixed on him. Attorney Lin, when you talk about division of marital property, do you mean dividing these ill-gotten funds? Or are you suggesting you want your client to be queued up on Interpol's red notice list before he even sets foot in a courtroom? The reception room fell into a deathly silence. The assistants Attorney Lin had brought stood exchanging nervous looks, sweat beading on their brows. They had originally thought this was just a routine divorce case between wealthy families. But they never expected that the woman held a chain of damning evidence capable of sending Mark and Sarah straight to prison. Ms. Gu, Lawyer Lin wiped his sweat. The arrogance in his tone had long since vanished, replaced by professional caution and probing. Since matters have come to this point, I think Mr. Mark may indeed have made serious mistakes in certain decisions. May I ask how you intend to proceed? My stance is very clear. I leaned back in my chair, my tone leaving no room for debate. First, immediately withdraw all unreasonable lawsuits and negotiations. Second, Mark must unconditionally sign a clean break divorce agreement, relinquishing any claim to all assets in the country. Third, cooperate with my legal team to recover all of the overseas funds that were transferred and transfer them into the group's account. If they cannot do these three things, I will not only make sure Mark spends the rest of his life in prison, but I will also, as a jointly liable party for damages, liquidate and auction off all of the properties under the Sarah family's name, leaving her with nothing and forcing her out of this industry. The hand holding the documents trembled slightly. He looked at me intently and finally realized that the woman before him not only possessed terrifying wealth and power, but also a meticulous, impenetrable mind. He closed the folder and swallowed hard. I will relay your exact words and these pieces of evidence to Mr. Mark in full. Sorry for the disturbance. Watching lawyer Lynn and his team flee in a panic, I picked up my phone and sent a brief message to the head of the International Financial Investigation Unit. Tighten the freeze on the Caribbean offshore accounts and close the net. In the luxurious banquet hall at the heart of the city's main commercial district, amidst fragrant clothes and coiffed hair, the light from crystal glasses and the glint of jade circulated the unique vanity and glamour of high society. Tonight was the annual fashion charity cocktail party gathering the city's top celebrities and trendsetters. The air was filled with the scent of expensive Chanel No. 5 and fresh roses. Invited as a special guest and business magnate, I entered the venue wearing a strapless silver gray ombre gown, instantly attracting countless looks of astonishment and awe. Yet another focal point of tonight's event was supposed to be Sarah, who had recently been making waves in the design world, since climbing close to Mark and using the group's resources to set up her private independent studio. Sarah had been trying to use tonight's charity auction to fully knock on the door of high fashion's top circle, even leaking that she would unveil a set of industry-shocking new haute couture pieces. At this moment, Sarah held a champagne flute, surrounded like a moon by fashion editors and small brand suppliers who didn't know the full story. She had specially chosen an expensive custom dress tonight, wearing a haughty smile and basking in their praise. However, when she saw me step into the room in high heels, an evidently rehearsed composure flickered into an expression of panic and stiffness. I ignored the suspicious disapproving glances around me and walked straight toward the main stage. Tonight, I was not only attending the party, I had come to be the terminator of this farce. A few senior executives from fashion groups who were on friendly terms with me approached and whispered, "Ms. Gu, Sarah has really prepared to launch her flagship collection tonight. I hear there's heavy funding behind it. What do you think?" "She won't get that chance." I curled my lips slightly. My voice was low but carried an unquestionable authority. Just then, as the host had finished the organizer's speech and was preparing to invite Sarah up to share her creative concept, I didn't wait for the host to speak. I walked to the soundboard, handed an encrypted flash drive to the technical director, and whispered a few words. The technical director's face changed, but upon seeing my identity and the stern look of my legal counsel behind me, he nervously plugged the drive into the master computer. The next second, the giant LED screen that had been playing Sarah's brand promo suddenly went black. And then a series of shocking comparison images were clearly projected before the hundreds of guests. On the left were the so-called exclusive original haute couture design sketches and core samples that Sarah was about to reveal tonight. On the right, glaringly, were the unpublished core design plans from my top fashion R&D center, which had already been filed for international patents and locked into storage 6 months earlier. Not only that, the screen immediately began to roll footage of complete surveillance videos showing Sarah's studio over the past year bribing former employees of my company and illegally stealing the core database, as well as screenshots of WeChat conversations between Sarah and Mark. In the screenshots, Sarah brazenly boasted about using Mark's position to steal trade secrets, her wording arrogantly explicit. The hall fell into a deathly silence. The once noisy banquet was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. All the guests' gazes shifted from the screen and landed, shocked, contemptuous, and mocking, on Sarah in the center of the crowd. Sarah's face drained of color in an instant. White as paper, the champagne flute slipped from her hand with a clink and fell to the floor. The expensive liquid and shards of the stemware splashed onto her custom high heels and the hem of her dress. She trembled violently all over, pointing at the big screen and screaming, This is forged. This is slander. You're invading my privacy. Forged." I clicked my high heels and walked gracefully step by step to the center of the stage, taking the microphone from the host. A cool, highly penetrating voice echoed through the speakers into every corner of the banquet hall. "Miss Sarah, open your eyes and look clearly. The blockchain anti-counterfeiting traceability timestamps on every design drawing, the official seals from the International Patent Office, and the bank receipts showing you used Mark's position to transfer funds into our company account are all here. The police have formally filed a case to investigate you for suspected violation of trade secrets and embezzlement. If you think all of this is forged, you're welcome to go explain it in court to the officers from the Economic Investigation Unit." No sooner had the words fallen than several uniformed economic investigation officers pushed through the stunned crowd, expressionless, and approached Sarah, flashing their badges. "Are you Ms. Sarah? We received a report that you're suspected of multiple serious commercial espionage and illegal appropriation cases. Please come with us to assist the investigation." The editors and suppliers who had been flattering Sarah immediately went pale and quickly stepped back as if avoiding a plague, fearful of being tainted by any association. Representatives from several brands that had deep collaborations with her publicly announced on the spot, "We unilaterally terminate all commercial cooperation with Ms. Sarah and her studio, and in light of her fraudulent behavior, we reserve the legal right to seek economic compensation." Under the countless disdainful, contemptuous, and gleeful eyes in the room, Sarah's legs went weak and she nearly collapsed to the floor. The two economic investigation officers gave her no chance to struggle. They supported the distraught Sarah on either side and led her away from the scene. I stood in the resplendent center of the stage, watching the embarrassed Sarah being taken away, my expression completely unmoved. Turning to the silent guests, I raised my champagne glass in salute, then drank the red wine in the glass at a gulp. In the top press hall of the city's landmark tower, a huge LED screen flashed a piercing cold light. The audience seats were packed. Cameras from dozens of mainstream media outlets were all pointed at the central dais. The air was thick with the tension of an approaching storm. Flashes popped in constant succession like countless cold blades slicing the air. Just yesterday, after Sarah was taken away by economic investigators, a desperate Mark had gone viral on overseas social media, hiring legions of paid posters to publish a tearful, tens of thousands soft words denunciation. In that article he willfully concealed his own betrayal-san affair, the embezzlement of vast public funds, and aiding Sarah in stealing trade secrets, and instead polished himself into an innocent victim long subjected to psychological oppression and cold expropriation by his wealthy wife. He even smeared me as using family power to maliciously frame and invert right and wrong. This carefully beautiful PR piece rapidly fermented online, prompting uninformed netizens and some extremist commentators to frantically repost it. For a time, topics like cold-blooded heiress in power and capital ruthlessly crushing an impoverished husband rocketed to the top of the trending list. Countless keyboard warriors raged in the comments, demanding a public response from the group and even hurling vicious curses and personal attacks. Facing the overwhelming online abuse and the backlash of public opinion, the PR team was already frantic. Some shareholders on the board grew uneasy and started calling to ask how to handle this sudden crisis. Yet I sat in the backstage makeup room, expression calm as still water, not even frowning. Against those self-important clowns, I never needed to make weak, impotent defenses to the PR department. Since they had dug the mire of public opinion themselves, I would use the most thorough, most devastating ironclad evidence to bury them at the very bottom of that quagmire. The clock pointed to 10 o'clock sharp. I stood up unhurriedly, smoothed the tailored black business suit I was wearing, and with steady steps walked up to the press dais. An uproar erupted below, Flashes throbbed wildly as countless reporters eagerly raised microphones and a chorus of abrasive questions surged forward. Ms. Gu, is it true that Mr. Mark accuses you of maliciously freezing his assets and even abusing your power to frame him? Do you have any explanation? I did not speak immediately, but swept a cold glance over the eager faces below. My long fingers tapped the microphone twice. The crisp sound instantly subdued the noise. The hall gradually fell silent. Everyone held their breath, waiting for this usually decisive woman in power to speak. Since you're all so interested in the truth, today I will pull away every fig leaf and let everyone see exactly who is inverting right and wrong. I turned and signaled to my assistant behind me. The screenshots of online rumors that had been lighting the big screen switched instantly to a compilation of conclusive evidence stamped with T. He read seals of the State Administration of Taxation, major commercial banks, and international forensic institutions. The first image is the complete audit report showing Mr. Mark's 3-year spree of tax evasion through sham overseas trade contracts. The total amount reaches tens of millions of yuan, violating national criminal law. This has been reported to the tax authorities under real name complaint, and a receipt of formal acceptance has been issued. My calm voice carried through the speakers. Each word landed like a hammer. A few senior reporters in the audience who had worn skeptical expressions now changed color as they saw the clear official seals and figures on the big screen, their hands tightening involuntarily around their recorders. On to the second image, I said without giving them a moment to breathe. Switching the screen. These are Mr. Mark's original transaction records showing his profligate lifestyle overseas, long-term maintenance of mistresses, and illegal money laundering under the company's name. What's more, this is the latest development synchronized from the Economic Crimes Unit just yesterday. After being lawfully summoned, Sarah completely cracked under pressure to save herself. She not only confessed to all the commercial crimes in full, but she also signed a confession on the spot and personally named Mark as the mastermind and direct beneficiary behind the entire corporate espionage and data theft case. This is a copy of the interrogation transcript bearing Sarah's own handwriting and fingerprints. On the big screen, screenshots and text records appeared showing Sarah in the interrogation room, weeping as she cleanly exposed Mark. The one who had once strutted arrogantly and felt untouchable in the fashion world now looked like a beaten dog in the face of irrefutable evidence. And every detail she revealed landed like loud slaps, striking hard at Mark's face overseas, the same Mark who had just posted a lengthy denunciation. The press conference fell into a deathly silence. The mercenary reporters who had come ready to snack on gossip, watch the show, or even take a swipe at someone were now staring at each other, cold sweat breaking out. No one had expected that what I held wasn't a pale public relations statement, but systematic, institutionalized, criminal evidence that led straight to prison. The internet is not beyond the law, and paid armies can't wash away criminal stains, I said, hands planted on the podium, my gaze like an ice blade fixed on the cameras, my voice cold and piercing. To any parasite who dares to invade the company's interests and trample the legal line, my response will always be 4 words. I'll see you through. This afternoon, my legal team formally filed an additional criminal complaint against Mark in court, accusing him of contract fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion, and industrial espionage. At the same time, the legal department has completed evidence collection against all marketing accounts and click-farm companies that maliciously spread false rumors and slandered the group's reputation online. And compensation lawsuits will be launched comprehensively at the same time. The moment the words left my mouth, no one in the audience dared to question anything further. The reporters who had been the loudest suddenly wished they could hide their microphones, afraid of being singled out by this decisive woman in power. I straightened up gracefully, gave the cameras a smile heavy with pressure, and then turned and walked down from the podium. In the private bank's VIP reception room, the air was filled with the composed aroma of premium cedarwood intermingled with aged portea. This was the City Sand, indeed the entire Asia-Pacific region's most elite private wealth management center. boasting an extremely strict client privacy protection system and staggering financial barriers. At this moment I sat upright on a leather sofa, my long fingers gently swaying a white porcelain teacup, my gaze calm as I looked at the senior private bank manager opposite me. Sweat continually beading on his forehead. The manager pushed a latest credit risk assessment report toward me with both hands, his tone cautious and reverent. Mr. Gu, as you suspected, after Mr. Mark's overseas funding chain completely broke down, left with no way out. He submitted a last-minute emergency liquidity loan application to our head office late last night through encrypted channels for as much as 200 million yuan. At the same time, he attempted to pledge an overseas commercial property previously endorsed by the group in his name as collateral to make a final leverage move. I set down the teacup. The porcelain struck the glass table with a crisp sound. I didn't even glance at the risk assessment report, merely sneering. 200 million. His credit rating has already fallen into the negative, and he still dares to fantasize like this. Manager, you should be well aware who the core major shareholder of this private bank is, and what the bank's capital relationship with our group is. The manager hurriedly wiped the sweat from his brow and replied repeatedly. Mr. Gu, rest assured, although our bank serves high-end clients worldwide, we would never open the green light for anyone suspected of serious criminal activity or whose credit is fundamentally ruined. Moreover, as an important shareholder on our core board, your will is the highest risk control standard. We have not only unanimously rejected Mark's loan application, but in accordance with international financial anti-money laundering and credit-sharing agreements, we have formally placed him on the global high-risk financial blacklist. Not only that, I leaned forward slightly, my gaze sharp as a knife. What I need you to do is more than reject it. Under the contract's cross-default clause, all of Mark's existing small credit loans, credit card overdrafts, and undue pledged wealth management products with this bank must immediately mature. Notify your legal and collections teams to immediately send debt demand notices to all his public and covert accounts worldwide. If he cannot repay all debts within 48 hours, immediately initiate judicial enforcement proceedings and publicly auction off the few limited edition supercars stored in the garages of his luxury homes. Hearing this, the manager secretly admired this woman's ruthless decisiveness. He drew a deep breath and said with solemn respect, Mr. Gu, rest assured we will execute this at once. People like Mark, who attempt to exploit financial loopholes in a last-ditch struggle, will not be given any respite here. Good. I rose and smoothed my bespoke overcoat. Also, compile all materials and communication records related to Mark's attempted illicit loan, and transfer them directly to the economic crime prosecutor handling his case. This will be the final financial straw that breaks him. When I left the private bank building, the sky had already begun to darken, lights coming on as the city bathed in a blaze of neon. Yet far away in a foreign land, Mark, agonized and desperately waiting for a life-saving transfer, could never imagine that his last straw had not only been cut off on the spot, but had been turned into a noose tightening steadily around his neck. At the same time, the assistant's call came through to my phone. Chairman. The latest news. When Mark learned that the loan had been flatly denied and that major financial institutions worldwide were jointly pursuing collection, he completely collapsed in his temporary local residence. He not only smashed everything in the room, but also had an extremely violent, ripping argument with a panicked Sarah over the phone. They are now accusing each other of being the root cause of this disaster and have even begun, through their respective lawyers, preparing to publicly turn on one another in court. Dog. Listening to the report on the other end of the line, I felt no surprise. A cold, ironic curve lifted the corner of my mouth. True friendship in adversity. In this farce woven from money, betrayal, and desire, they were never more than parasites using each other to suit their needs. When the nutrient of was completely exhausted and the shadow of destruction hung overhead, that fragile relationship naturally splintered in the ugliest way. I slid into the back seat and instructed the driver to return directly to the group headquarters. in the cigar room of a high-end private club in the suburbs. The air was thick with the bitter, heavy scent of tobacco. Outside the window the night lay heavy, shrouding the whole building in oppressive shadow. This was the perfect place for the city's powerful and famous to meet privately and conduct secret negotiations. Equipped with absolute privacy, soundproofing, and security. Yet tonight the atmosphere was taut as a drawn bowstring, the air carrying a stench of imminent collapse. I sat on the main leather sofa, holding a glass of very old whiskey, the ice clinking gently against the glass. Opposite me on a leather couch sat Sarah, who had just slipped back into the country through secret channels, making a last-ditch struggle. At this moment Sarah no longer bore the arrogant poise she once had in the fashion world. Her couture gown had been replaced by cheap, disheveled casual clothes. Her hair was messy, her face haggard, her eye sockets hollow. Even the makeup at the corners of her eyes had run from prolonged crying and terror. She looked at me trembling. Her once sharp tongue was now shaky and dry, her eyes filled with despair, fear, and a madness born of desperation. Mr. Goo. Goo. Sarah's voice quivered, her knees nearly giving out. I know I was wrong. I beg you, give me a way out. It was all Mark who enticed me first. He assured me your marriage was already a sham. He promised to get my studio all the business resources. Even the plan to steal core data was his idea. He plotted it all. I was just an innocent pawn he deceived and used. Listening to Sarah sell out, frame, and vilify her accomplice without scruples to save herself, I couldn't suppress a cold snort. I set my glass down on the coffee table with a dull thud and looked at her coolly. Innocent, Sarah, when you colluded with him behind my back to hollow out the company's funds and steal trade secrets, why didn't you claim innocence then? When you looked down on everyone at fashion events and tried to climb up by trampling my reputation, why didn't you say you were innocent? My gaze made Sarah shudder all over. Her face went as pale as paper. She bit her lip, as if clutching a last straw, and suddenly fumbled in her worn handbag for a thick craft paper envelope. Hands shaking, she pushed it toward me and, in a frantic, urgent tone, said, Mr. Goo, I know you've been gathering evidence on Mark's crimes. Here. Inside are the passwords for several of Mark's other secret offshore accounts registered overseas, a full ledger of his long-term money laundering through underground banks, and even original documents of him forging the board seal with his own hand. If you spare me, I'll do anything. I'll be the tainted witness and personally put Mark behind bars in court. If it means ruining him completely, I'll expose everything. Seeing Sarah's hideous face, selling her soul to survive, I felt not a flicker of sympathy, only deep scorn. The spectacle of dogs biting dogs was, as it turned out, far more brilliantly grotesque than I had imagined. Just as Sarah waited with hopeful expectation for my response, the wooden door of the private room was suddenly flung open from outside with a loud bang, accompanied by hurried, chaotic footsteps. A disheveled figure stumbled in. Looking closely, it was Mark, who should have been abroad but had sneakily returned to the country out of desperation. Mark's hair was unkempt, his eyes bloodshot, his suit wrinkled. There was not a trace left of the confident executive of a multinational corporation he once was. As soon as he walked through the door, he instantly spotted Sarah sitting in front of me, holding the incriminating evidence that exposed him. At that moment, Mark's sanity completely shattered. His eyes turned blood red, and his face twisted with rage like a wild beast cornered into a deadened. Whore! You backstabbing whore! Mark howled hysterically, completely heedless of their surroundings, lunging forward and grabbing Sarah by her hair, raising his palm to deliver a savage slap. I sacrificed everything for you, even risking prison to help you make money, yet you go behind my back to surrender to her and sell out all my secrets. You heartless harlot. I'll drag you down with me. Arg. Mark. You're crazy. Let go of me. Sarah screamed in anguish, wildly clawing at Mark's face with both hands. The two instantly rolled into a violent scuffle across the luxurious club carpet. All the sweet vows and talk of true love's escape from their past crumbled instantly into a tragic farce revealing the ugly reality of a dog-yat-dog brawl once naked in. Tourists and legal consequences entered the scene. Quickly, the bouncers inside the exclusive cigar room stepped in, wrestling the emotionally unhinged duo into submission and pinning them firmly against the floor in seconds. Mark lay face down, nose bruised and swollen, gasping for breath. Sarah slumped nearby, disheveled, weeping bitterly while both continued hurling vile curses at one another, spilling every ugly secret and criminal detail about their past actions with unervingly candid thoroughness. I sat on the couch, watching coldly the farce they'd meticulously directed and starred in. Not even flinching, I lifted my warm tea and sipped gently, saying in a voice devoid of any emotion, "Have you finished your fight? If not, I can have security take you downstairs to the parking lot to continue." At hearing my voice, the two crumpled on the floor, froze, and gradually ceased their struggle. They looked up, terror and hopelessness etched on their faces. And only now did they suddenly realize that they'd been nothing more than marionettes, manipulated by me all along. I slowly packed the brown paper bag into my briefcase, stood up, and looked down at them imperiously. "Mark, Sarah, your elaborate betrayal and elopement plan was nothing but a self-destructive farce from start to finish. You really thought you could escape or hide. Let me tell you honestly, just as you were tearing at each other here, economic investigation officers have already been waiting downstairs for a long time." As soon as I finished speaking, the private room door swung open again, and several plainclothes officers from the Economic Investigation Department stepped in, their expressions devoid of emotion. "Mr. Mark, Ms. Sarah, you are suspected in multiple serious cases of embezzlement, commercial espionage, illegal money laundering, and contract fraud. The evidence is conclusive. You are now being lawfully summoned and detained. Please come with us." Their icy words were followed by the sharp clasp of handcuffs securing Mark and Sarah's wrists. Only at this moment did the pair go completely pale, collapsing lifelessly onto the ground, unable to utter a single prayer for mercy. After watching them carried away like dead dogs, I adjusted the collar of my trench coat and walked out elegantly in high heels, in the heavily fortified visiting room of the local procuratorate. Incandescent lights cast cold, glaring halos, turning the thick bulletproof glass into a mirror-like surface. The air was heavy with a suffocating sense of despair, while the walls, painted bone white, bore not a single extra color. This was the frontier where justice met crime, and the final reckoning before the law's iron hammer fell. Dressed in a sharply tailored dark gray business suit, I stepped calmly and elegantly into the visiting room. Sitting on a high-backed special chair, my expression remained as placid as still water, without the smallest hint of agitation in my gaze. Through the double-layered bulletproof glass, I watched as the door to the detention cell opposite was slowly pushed open. Two uniformed bailiffs flanked the door on either side, one left, one right, escorting Mark inside. He was gaunt, his eyes unfocused. After just a few short days of separation, the once arrogant, dominant executive of a multinational corporation now looked completely unrecognizable. His once neat tailor-made suit had been swapped for the standardized orange clothing of prison inmates. The wide collar made his figure appear especially frail and thin, his hair greasy and disheveled, his sunken eyes bloodshot and pale as if his blood had been drained away. The moment he dropped into his chair, looked up, and saw me through the glass, a flash of pure terror and shame instantly crossed his face, instantly consumed by an endless well of hatred, hopelessness, and madness. Quaking, Mark reached for the internal intercom receiver on the table, his knuckles turning stark white from the force. He thrust the receiver hard against his ear, and a hoarse, shrieking voice rang out from the other end. "You, goo, goo. How deep do you have to push me before you're satisfied? You've frozen all my assets, ruined my credit. Now you've colluded with economic detectives to get me dragged to this hellhole. 100 days of marital affection after one day together. Why did you have to go this far?" Listening to Mark's hysterical accusations and wails, I didn't even lift my eyelids. I slowly raised the cup of warm water on the table, took a gentle sip, then brought the receiver slowly to my ear. My voice was icy calm, yet carried a tone of absolute, domineering control from above. I said, "Mark, even until this very moment, you're still making excuses for your shameless conduct by invoking the phrase marital affection, when you were secretly colluding with Sarah, embezzling massive corporate funds, and even conspiring to kill me. Why didn't you once think about what 100 days of marital affection after one day together truly means? Adults must pay the price for their greed and betrayal, and this is only the beginning. You heartless madman," Mark roared, pounding his fists furiously against the bulletproof glass on the opposite side, face contorted in rage. "You really think locking me up means you can rest easy? Let me tell you, that bitch Sarah is poisoning her interrogation room right next door, trying to murder me, to get herself a reduced sentence. She's thrown all the blame onto me. You two are teaming up to destroy me, even as a ghost. I won't let you live in peace." "No need to wait until you become a ghost," I coldly interrupted his raving, my tone devoid of any warmth. "You're already enduring hell on earth. Just half an hour ago." The economic detective prosecutor handed over the final batch of supplementary evidence, several massive folders containing tens of thousands of words for my review. Among the evidence are your full financial records involving money laundering through offshore companies abroad. Forensic analysis confirming that you personally forged the official board of directors seal, and Sarah's full confession video and statement, hand-signed and fingerprinted, detailing in full how you meticulously plotted and carried out the entire corporate espionage and industrial secrets theft, with multiple charges compounded upon each other. You're clearly the principal culprit. When your public trial takes place next week, you'll face a prison sentence spanning over a decade, perhaps even decades. As for the remainder of your life, wallow in repentance within the cold stone walls of bars. When Mark heard the words "more than a decade in prison," the last trace of color drained from his face in an instant. He went limp in his chair as if struck by lightning. The microphone in his hand slid off with a bang and clattered on the table, making a harsh noise. He stared at me through the bulletproof glass in a daze, his lips trembling violently, unable to utter another word. His former swagger, scheming, and arrogance were all crushed into dust before the inexorable machinery of the law. I didn't look at him again. I rose gracefully, returned the microphone to its place, then turned and walked out of the meeting room without a shred of regret. Almost at the same time, in the interrogation room next door, Sarah too was facing a complete breakdown. When the lead prosecutor slammed down a multi-page indictment on the table and made it clear that because the circumstances were particularly serious, and although her attitude toward pleading guilty was positive, it could not offset the core facts of the crime, she would face many years of heavy sentence. Sarah let out a heart-wrenching wail, collapsed into the interrogation chair, and completely lost her mind. This betrayal and revenge drama the two of them had staged together finally met its most just and most brutal conclusion at the hands of the country's judicial authorities. Inside the courthouse's trial chamber, beneath the towering dome hung the solemn and sacred national emblem. Dark red solid wood defense and spectator benches were arranged with tasteful variation, and the air was filled with a solemn, suffocating pressure. The gallery seats were packed with dozens of mainstream media outlets, legal experts, industry representatives, and specially invited observers held their breath, waiting for the final judgment in this economic and criminal giant case that had captivated the whole city. With the marshal's authoritative call, "All rise," the presiding judge and two associate judges walked up to the bench with measured steps and sat down solemnly. Then, the side door to the defendant's dock was slowly opened, and two expressionless bailiffs escorted Mark and Sarah in. Mark and Sarah had long since shed the glamorous trappings of their former social prominence. Both wore the detention center's uniform, faces gaunt, eyes swollen and red, their expressions full of inescapable despair and panic. Mark, once proud, now hung his head low to his chest, lacking even the courage to glance at the gallery. Sarah kept tugging at the hem of her clothing with thin fingers, her body trembling in the faint air conditioning breeze. The once untouchable, calculating power couple now stood before the solemn court as nothing more than ugly, selfish, desperate convicts. I sat in the plaintiff's principal seat, wearing a sharply tailored dark blue bespoke suit, my expression calm and haughty. I did not look at the two clowns who had betrayed me. Instead, I lifted my chin slightly and fixed a steady gaze on the judges on the bench, quietly awaiting the moment of final judgment. Court is now in session. The presiding judge is clear. Authoritative strike of the gavel sounded heavily on the wooden block, and the courtroom fell into absolute silence. During the sentencing phase that followed, the presiding judge read aloud, in an extremely clear, objective, and indisputable voice, the dozens of pages comprising the criminal and civil judgments. Each word, each charge, fell like a crushing iron hammer on the two defendants. The court, after hearing the case, finds defendant Mark, as a senior manager of the group, abused his position and, together with defendant Sarah, through setting up shell companies, forging technical procurement contracts, maliciously transferring company assets, and other means, amassed a cumulative amount involved in the case of great magnitude. His actions constitute the crime of embezzlement in the course of duty. Additionally, during his tenure, Mark used deceptive methods to evade large sums in taxes, violating national tax laws and constituting the crime of tax evasion. Furthermore, the two defendants, for private gain, maliciously stole and leaked core commercial secrets, constituting the crime of infringing trade secrets. At each charge read, Mark and Sarah trembled violently. Every criminal fact listed in the judgment was supported by massive, incontrovertible evidence provided by our legal team and the Economic Investigation Department, forming a perfect, closed chain of evidence that left no room for excuse or reversal. In view of the foregoing, pursuant to the provisions of relevant laws and regulations, the court rules as follows. The atmosphere in the courtroom grew utterly oppressive in that instant. Everyone held their breath awaiting the final sentencing. Defendant Mark is guilty of embezzlement in the course of duty, tax evasion, and infringement of trade secrets, with multiple combined penalties. He is sentenced to 14 years fixed term imprisonment, and all of his personal lawful property is ordered confiscated, and a fine of $50 million is imposed. Defendant Sarah is guilty of embezzlement in the course of duty and infringement of trade secrets, with multiple combined penalties. She is sentenced to 9 years fixed term imprisonment, and her illegal gains are ordered confiscated, and a fine of $20 million is imposed. At the same time, the two defendants are ordered to jointly and severally compensate plaintiff Ms. Gu and the group company for economic losses and reputational damages totaling $180 million within 10 days after the judgment takes effect. When the cold, heavy numbers 14 years imprisonment and 9 years imprisonment were clearly pronounced by the presiding judge, Sarah on the defendant's bench finally collapsed psychologically, emitting a heart-wrenching wail. Her legs went weak and she slumped back in the defendant's chair, nearly falling to the floor if the bailiffs had not quickly steadied her. Mark sat stunned, eyes glassy and face ashen, his lips trembling violently, his gaze filled with endless remorse and despair. 14 years behind bars meant that the prime years of his life would be spent inside cold stone walls and behind high security fences and electrified nets. The wealth and status he once sought through betrayal and plunder had not only turned to dust but also left him burdened with astronomical debts and indelible criminal stigma. Court is adjourned. With the heavy rap of the gavel, the months-long, dramatic counteroffensive in this high society feud finally reached its settled end. The bailiffs efficiently re-handcuffed the limp Mark and Sarah and forcibly escorted them out through the side door, with the heavy clang of the iron doors closing. The two traitors who had tried to trample me underfoot were ruthlessly crushed by the wheels of history and justice, forever cast to the margins of normal society. I rose slowly, adjusted my suit collar, and, under countless awed and admiring gazes, walked out of the courtroom with graceful, Determined steps. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of the CEO's office at the group's headquarters, the entire city's bustling scenery lay before me. The clock hand pointed to noon. Brilliant sunlight pierced the double-layer laminated glass, bathing the spacious, bright office in spotless light. A faint scent of white tea lingered in the air, the calm and tranquility unique to those who sit above. I stood before the vast panoramic window, looking down on the streets below where cars flowed like ants and the traffic outside the group's building never ceased. A few months ago, when that message "your best friend ran away with me" lit up, no one would have imagined that, in such a short time, this long-planned betrayal and conspiracy would be utterly smashed by my most thunderous means and transform into a textbook-perfect counterstrike. On the desk, the final liquidation report the executive assistant had just presented lay quietly. I turned, took steady steps to the large black sandalwood desk, sat, and opened the weighty document. The first page of the report was conspicuously the list of asset executions following the court's final judgment. All of Mark's illegally concealed assets overseas and domestically, his personal property lawfully confiscated, and funds obtained through judicial auctions had been lawfully transferred. The enormous compensation and fines totaling 180 million yuan had also been fully and forcibly executed into the group's corporate account. Mark, who once attempted to hollow out the company and betray his marriage to start a new life, was now in the highest security prison several dozen kilometers away, wearing cold prison clothing and beginning his long, despairing 14-year sentence. His accomplice Sarah had long since begun serving time in another women's prison. Her private studio was completely deregistered, and her family's business, implicated and severely insolvent, had already declared bankruptcy and liquidation within the industry, utterly marginalized by the market, leaving not even the last trace behind. Chairman, this is the preliminary quarterly global financial report data just brought from the CFO's office. The executive assistant pushed the door open with a thick stack of documents, his tone betraying restrained excitement and admiration. Thanks to your decisive move to strip away bad assets and reorganize core business units when the crisis erupted, the group's overall revenue this quarter not only suffered no negative impact but actually surged by 35% against the trend. Several overseas core project stock prices set consecutive record highs. Every board member is sincerely convinced of your absolute control. I didn't even look up. My long fingers flipped a page of the financials. My voice was as calm as water. This isn't luck. It's the result they brought upon themselves. Notify everyone, hold an expanded board meeting tonight and launch the upgraded global strategic layout for the group's next 5 years. I want everyone to see clearly that no one can shake this commercial empire I built with my own hands. Underst. Good. I'll arrange it immediately. The assistant responded respectfully, then turned and left the office, closing the heavy double wooden doors behind him. The entire penthouse office returned to perfect silence. I set down the gold pen, rose, and walked back to the floor-to-ceiling window. Sunlight fell on my shoulders, tracing the sharp lines of my tailored suit. The mirror-like glass reflected my unruffled, yet chillingly beautiful face. Past betrayals, schemes, conspiracies, and intrigues were now nothing but scenery along the road under my feet. The garbage had been cleared, order fully rebuilt, and my legend had only just begun to unveil its most dazzling, grand new chapter.